Dr. Helen Carter stood in the Waste Management Center of Earth Station Alpha, watching the endless flow of garbage from 47 different worlds. The smell was terrible, even with the air filters running at maximum power. Around her, human. Workers sorted through alien trash with practiced efficiency, separating materials that could be recycled from those that needed special disposal. This was humanity's place in the great galactic consortium. They were the janitors, the mechanics, the people who cleaned up after everyone else. Helen had 3 degrees in engineering and 2 in xenobiology, but her job was making sure alien garbage got processed correctly. The consortium had existed for over 2,000 years. It was a massive trading alliance that connected dozens of star systems. Each species had their special role. The Xanthari were the smart ones with their crystal brains that could calculate anything in seconds. They handled all the complicated math and logistics. The Maraxians were the warriors, big and strong with natural armor plating. They protected the trade routes and kept everyone safe. The Vespians were the diplomats, floating gracefully through the air and speaking in musical voices that could convince anyone of anything. And then there were the humans. They fixed things when they broke. They cleaned up messes. They did the boring work that nobody else wanted to do. Helen's team was small but skilled. Jake Morrison was her best engineer, a quiet man who could repair anything with whatever parts he could find. Linda Hayes was brilliant with alien computer systems, even though she only had access to the oldest and most basic models. Pete Williams knew more about spacecraft engines than most Maraxian mechanics, but he was stuck maintaining garbage haulers instead of warships. Every day was the same routine. The alien supervisors would give them their assignments with barely hidden disgust. Fix this machine, clean that mess, process this shipment. Never any thanks, never any recognition. The humans did their work and went home to their small quarters in the least desirable sections of the station. Helen had tried many times to get better equipment for her team. The recycling machines were old and constantly breaking down. The human quarters needed repairs. Her people deserved better assignments that matched their skills. But every request was denied by Administrator Veltar, a tall Xanthari with glowing blue crystals where a human would have eyes. Your species is adequate for current duties, Veltar would say in his cold, emotionless voice. More complex tasks require superior intellect. What Veltar and the other aliens did not know was that humans had been learning. While they sorted garbage, they studied alien technology. While they cleaned floors, they memorized station layouts and security systems. While they repaired basic equipment, they figured out how all the advanced systems worked together. Helen kept detailed records of everything. Every insult, every dismissal, every time human ideas were stolen and credited to others. She shared this information with other human communities throughout consortium space through encrypted messages hidden in routine maintenance reports. The humans had become invisible to the aliens, which made them perfect spies. They saw everything, heard everything, and understood more than anyone realized. The Xanthari thought they were too smart to need human input. The Maraxians thought they were too strong to need human help. The Vespians thought they were too sophisticated to notice human contributions. They were all wrong. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after Helen had started her secret documentation project. The cargo ship Meridian was limping back from the outer rim colonies with critical system failures. The ship carried medical supplies for 3 different worlds, including vaccines for a plague outbreak on Kepler-7. The Meridian's crew was mostly Xanthari, with a few Maraxian guards and 1 human engineer named Pete Williams. Pete was only there because human labor was cheap, and the shipping company wanted to save money on the flight. When the ship's main engine started failing halfway through the journey, The Xanthari crew panicked. Their crystal brains could calculate exactly what was wrong, but they could not figure out how to fix it with the available parts. The engine needed a specific component that they did not have in storage that the Maraxian guards suggested fighting. Their way to the nearest station, but the engine would die long before they reached safety. The Vespian communication officer sent desperate messages asking for rescue, but no other ships were close enough to help. Pete Williams asked if he could try something. The Xanthari captain Zethkar almost said no. Humans were just maintenance. Workers. But with no other options, he agreed to let Pete attempt a repair. Pete spent 6 hours in the engine room, working with spare parts from 3 different systems. He took circuits from the food processors, power conduits from the lighting system, and cooling pipes from the water recyclers. The Xanthari watched in confusion as he built something that should not have worked according to their calculations. But it did work. Pete's improvised repair got the engine running at 60% power, enough to reach the nearest station. The medical supplies were delivered on time, and thousands of lives were saved. The official report credited innovative Xanthari engineering solutions for saving the ship. Pete Williams was not mentioned at all. When Helen read the report, she felt something break inside her chest. It was not anger exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. That night, Helen sent a coded message to every human settlement in consortium space. The message was simple: document everything. The day of reckoning is coming. What the aliens did not understand was that humans had been holding their civilization together for decades. The Xanthari computers needed constant maintenance that only humans seemed able to provide. Their crystal brains were powerful but fragile, and they could not adapt when things went wrong. The Maraxian weapons were impressive, but they needed human technicians to keep the different alien technologies working together. The Vespian communication networks were beautiful and complex, but they were also ancient and required constant human repair work. Every alien species thought they were superior to humans in their own way, but they all depended on human labor to keep their systems running. The humans were like the foundation of a building, invisible and taken for granted, but absolutely essential. Helen looked around the waste management center and saw it differently now. This was not a place where humans were stuck doing unimportant work. This was the heart of the station's life support system. Human workers processed the waste that kept air and water clean for everyone. They recycled materials that were turned into new equipment and supplies. They maintained the systems that kept 47 different species alive and healthy. The aliens thought humans were just janitors, but janitors know where all the bodies are buried. They have access to every room, every system, every secret. They see what gets thrown away and can guess what people are really doing. They know which systems are failing and which ones are being held together with improvised repairs. Morrison came over to Helen's desk with a report about the main recycling unit. "It's acting up again," he said. "Same problem as last month. I can fix it, but it'll take me most of the day." Helen looked at the report and then at Jake's tired face. He was a brilliant engineer who could design starships, but instead he spent his days fixing garbage machines with spare parts and determination. "Do what you can," she told him. "But Jake, start keeping copies of everything you do. Every repair, every improvement, every time you solve a problem they said was impossible." Jake nodded slowly. He understood what she was really saying. BSG documentation project was growing. Humans throughout consortium space were recording their contributions, their innovations, their essential work. They were building a case that would shock the galaxy when the time came to present it. But Helen was planning something much bigger than a complaint or a lawsuit. She was planning for the day when humanity would show the consortium exactly how much they were worth. By walking away. 6 months after the Meridian incident, Helen Carter stood before the Grand Assembly on Nexus Prime. The massive chamber was filled with representatives from every species in the galactic consortium. Towering Moraxian warriors sat next to crystalline Synthari delegates. Floating Vespians drifted gracefully above their assigned seats. And in the smallest section, almost hidden in the back corner, sat the human delegation. Helen had been chosen to speak for all of humanity. She carried with her a datapad containing thousands of reports, repair logs, and maintenance records. 6 months of careful documentation had revealed the truth about human contributions to the consortium. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But as Helen looked around the grand chamber, she wondered if anyone would listen. Consortium Prime Minister Zeth called the assembly to order. He was a massive Moraxian with dark armor plating and scars from countless battles. His voice boomed through the chamber as he addressed the delegates. "We gather today to discuss the petition from the human delegation," Zeth announced. "They request equal representation and recognition of their contributions to our great alliance." Murmurs of amusement rippled through the chamber. Some delegates laughed openly. The Zenthari section remained silent, but Helen could see the dismissive glow of their crystal formations. The Vespians whispered to each other in their musical language, their tones clearly mocking. Helen stood and walked to the speaking platform. The chamber fell silent, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. What could these simple humans possibly have to say? "Honored delegates," Helen began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "For decades, humanity has served the consortium. Faithfully. We have maintained your systems, repaired your equipment, and solved problems that others deemed impossible. We ask only for recognition of our contributions and equal treatment as members of this alliance." She activated her datapad, and the chamber's display screens lit up with maintenance records, repair logs, and technical specifications. The evidence showed human engineers solving critical problems, human technicians keeping essential systems running, and human workers maintaining the infrastructure that kept the consortium functioning. These records show that human labor and expertise are essential to consortium operations, Helen continued. We are not asking for charity or special treatment. We are asking for the respect and recognition that our contributions have earned. Administrator Veltar rose from the Zenthari section. His crystal eyes flickered with cold light as he addressed the assembly. The human delegation presents interesting data, Veltar said in his emotionless voice. However, these records merely confirm what we already know. Humans perform adequate maintenance work under proper supervision. This does not qualify them for expanded roles or equal representation. Prime Minister Zethkal nodded in agreement. He looked directly at Helen with barely concealed contempt. The human species has found its proper place within our alliance, Zethkal declared. You are adequate servants who should be grateful for your inclusion. Your request for equal representation is denied. The words hit Helen like a physical blow. Around the chamber, delegates nodded in approval or laughed outright. The Vespian section erupted in musical chatter that sounded like mocking song. Even the usually stoic Zenthari seemed pleased with the dismissal. Adequate servants. The phrase echoed in Helen's mind as she returned to her seat. After everything humans had done, after all the problems they had solved and crises they had prevented, they were still just servants in the eyes of the consortium. Helen's communication device buzzed with an encrypted message from Earth. She read it quickly, her expression unchanged despite the revolution contained in those few words. Initiate protocol exodus. Humanity withdraws from the galactic consortium, effective immediately. The message had been sent to every human settlement in consortium space. From the outer rim colonies to the core worlds, humanity was about to make the most coordinated decision. In their history. Helen looked around the Grand Assembly one last time. These delegates had no idea what they had just lost. They thought humans were expendable, replaceable, unimportant. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The human delegation left Nexus Prime that same day. Their departure was barely noticed by the other species. Just a few servants going back to their menial jobs, nothing more. But across the galaxy, something unprecedented was happening. In the waste management centers of dozens of stations, human workers were packing their belongings. In the maintenance bays of the consortium fleet, human engineers were deleting their access codes and wiping their repair databases. In the depths of alien worlds, human technicians were shutting down systems and removing critical components. Williams was working in the engine room of a Maraxian battlecruiser when he received the message. He looked around at the massive engines he had spent months repairing and upgrading. The Maraxian crew had never thanked him for his work, never acknowledged his contributions. To them, he was just another tool to be used. Pete began systematically, removing the custom modifications he had installed. These were improvements that the ship's original designers had never thought of, solutions that only human creativity could have produced. Without them, the engines would still run, but at much lower efficiency. Jake Morrison was on mining platform 7 when the message arrived. He was in the middle of repairing the main ore processor, a complex machine that required delicate adjustments and intuitive understanding. The Xanthari supervisor had been standing over him all morning, criticizing his work and demanding faster results. Jake finished the repair, then quietly began removing the specialized tools he had created for maintaining alien equipment. These tools were his own inventions, designed to bridge the gap between different technological systems. The Xanthari had never bothered to learn how they worked. Linda Hayes was in the communication center of Nexus Station when she got the message. She was troubleshooting a network problem that had baffled the Vespian technicians for weeks. The ancient communication arrays were failing, and only Linda understood the outdated protocols well enough to keep them running. Linda solved the problem, then began copying her repair files to a secure human server. She deleted every trace of her work from the consortium databases. The Vespians would have to figure out the repairs themselves next time. All across consortium space, the same scene was playing out. Human workers were completing their final tasks, then quietly disappearing. They took their tools, their knowledge, and their irreplaceable expertise with them. Captain Roy Bennett commanded the civilian transport New Hope as it made its rounds through consortium space. His ship was part of a secret human fleet that most aliens did not even know existed. The consortium had always assumed that humans were dependent on alien technology for space travel. They were wrong about that too. Roy's ship was picking up human refugees from dozens of stations and colonies. The New Hope's cargo holds were full of families, engineers, technicians, and specialists. These were the people who had kept consortium, civilization running, and now they were leaving forever. The evacuation was remarkably smooth. Humans had been planning for this possibility for years, ever since it became clear that the consortium would never treat them as equals. They had built their own ships, established their own colonies, and developed their own technologies. The consortium had been so busy looking down on humanity that they had never noticed human independence growing. As the New Hope departed from Consortium Central, Roy received increasingly frantic communications from station administrators. Systems were failing faster than anyone had expected. These Xanthari computers were overheating without human-maintained cooling systems. Maraxian weapons platforms were going offline as compatibility protocols crashed. Vespian communication networks were dissolving into static as ancient relay stations. Failed. Roy listened to the panicked messages with grim satisfaction. For decades, humans had warned the consortium about these problems. They had submitted reports, offered solutions, and begged for resources to prevent system failures. Every request had been denied or ignored. Now, the bills were coming due, all At once, the first major failure occurred just 72 hours after the exodus began. A Xanthari science station lost life support when their environmental systems crashed. The crystals that powered their computers generated enormous amounts of heat, and the cooling systems had always been maintained by human technicians. Without proper maintenance, the systems overloaded and shut down. Similar failures were happening throughout consortium space. Trade ships were stranding themselves as navigation systems failed. Manufacturing centers were shutting down as their complex machinery broke without human maintenance. Even the Grand Assembly Building on Nexus Prime was experiencing power failures and communication blackouts. Prime, Minister Zethkal stood in his darkened office, watching emergency reports flood in from across the consortium. His aide, a nervous Vespian named Wisptel, floated nearby with a datapad full of crisis reports. "How bad is it?" Zethkal asked. 17 major stations are reporting critical system failures," Wisptel replied in his musical voice. "The Xanthari homeworld has lost 40% of their computational capacity." 3 weeks after humanity's exodus, Admiral Kreshvin stood on the bridge of the Consortium Defense Fleet flagship, Sovereign's Will. The massive dreadnought was supposed to be the most powerful warship in the galaxy, but right now it felt more like a floating scrap heap. Warning lights flashed across every control panel. The main weapons system was operating at 40% capacity. The shields flickered on and off randomly. The navigation computer kept giving conflicting readings that made no sense. Half the crew quarters had no power, and the other half were either too hot or too cold. Admiral Kreshvan was a veteran Meraxian warrior with over 200 years of combat experience. He had commanded fleets in dozens of battles and never lost a single engagement. But he had never faced an enemy like this before. The hegemony was attacking, and his ships were falling apart around him. The hegemony was an empire of militant species that had been expanding aggressively for decades. The consortium had held them back through superior technology and coordinated defense strategies. But now, with human technicians gone, that technological advantage was disappearing fast. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Outer Rim," reported. Communications Officer Velton, a young Vespian whose musical voice was strained with worry. "The colonies on Kepler 7, Ross Station, and New Geneva are all under attack." Kreshvin studied the tactical display with growing alarm. 3 separate hegemony fleets had launched coordinated strikes on frontier worlds. Under normal circumstances, the consortium's early warning network would have detected these fleets days before they reached their targets. But the sensor stations were failing without human maintenance, and the attacks had come as a complete surprise. "How long until we can reach the first battle zone?" Kreshvin asked. His navigation officer, a Xanthari named Vethkal, checked his instruments with obvious frustration. "The junk calculations are inconsistent, sir. Our computers keep producing different results. I estimate 6 hours, but I cannot guarantee accuracy." 6 hours. In 6 hours, those colonies could be completely destroyed. Kreshvin had dealt with technical problems before, but this was different. His ships were not just malfunctioning. They were dying slowly as critical systems failed one by one. The first battle was a disaster. The consortium fleet arrived at Kepler 7 and found the colony already under siege. Hegemony warships were pounding the surface with plasma bombardments while their troops landed in assault transports. Kreshvin ordered his fleet to attack, but nothing went as planned. The Sovereign's Will fired its main weapons, but only half. The batteries responded. The shots that did fire were poorly aimed because the targeting computers were giving incorrect data. Instead of the devastating barrage that should have crippled the enemy fleet, the consortium ships managed only scattered hits that the hegemony forces responded with disciplined precision. Their ships might not have been as advanced as consortium vessels, but they worked properly. Their weapons fired when ordered. Their shields stayed up. Their engines responded to commands. Captain Jextar commanded the hegemony battlecruiser, Iron Fist. He watched the consortium attack with professional interest and growing confidence. These were supposed to be the most feared warships in the galaxy, but they were fighting like amateur pilots in broken ships. Target their flagship, Jextar ordered. All weapons full power. The Iron Fist and its escort ships concentrated their fire on the Sovereign's will. The consortium flagship's shields held for a few moments, then collapsed completely as the shield generators overloaded. Secondary explosions rocked the ship. As critical systems failed, Krushvin found himself thrown to the deck as his bridge erupted in sparks and smoke. Half his crew was injured, and the other half was struggling with control panels that no longer responded properly. "Damage report," he shouted over the alarms. "Shields down, weapons at 20%, engines failing," his damage control officer reported. "Sir, we need to withdraw." The retreat was even more humiliating than the battle. 3 consortium ships limped away from Kepler-7, leaving the colony to its fate. Behind them, 7 major warships floated dead in space, their crews either killed or captured. It was the worst defeat in consortium naval history. The news of the disaster spread quickly through what remained of consortium space. On the Zenthari, Homeworld Chief Logic Coordinator Zinthal tried to analyze what had gone wrong. His crystal brain could process vast amounts of data, but the conclusions made no sense. The mathematical probability of such widespread system failures is negligible, Zinthal told his assembled staff. Our technology is superior to hegemony equipment by significant margins. This defeat should have been impossible. But Zinthal's deputy, a younger Zenthari named Vorthal, had been studying the maintenance records more carefully. What he found was disturbing. "Coordinator, I have discovered troubling patterns in our system logs," Vorthal reported. "Many of our critical systems were modified by human technicians over the years. These modifications are not documented in our technical manuals." Zinthal's crystals flickered with confusion. "Explain." "The humans appear to have made thousands of small improvements to our equipment. Efficiency upgrades, compatibility patches, performance enhancements. Our systems have become dependent on these modifications to function properly." The implications hit Zinthal like a physical blow. The Zenthari had always believed their technology was perfect, requiring no improvements from inferior species. But the humans had been quietly fixing problems and making improvements that the Zenthari had never even noticed. Without those improvements, Zenthari systems were reverting to their original specifications. And those original specifications were not as perfect as everyone had believed. The situation was even worse on Moraxian worlds. War leader Throx stood in the main shipyard on the Moraxian homeworld, watching his workers struggle with production lines that kept breaking down. The Moraxians were excellent warriors and skilled metalworkers, but their industrial processes had grown incredibly complex over the centuries. Different technologies from various species had been integrated into single production systems. These hybrid systems required constant adjustment and fine-tuning to work properly. Human technicians had provided that fine-tuning for decades. They had understood how to make incompatible technologies work together. They had bridged the gaps between different engineering philosophies. They had been the translators who allowed alien systems to communicate with each other. Now those systems were failing in cascading breakdowns. A Zenthari computer would send commands that a Moraxian fabricator could not understand. A Vespian quality control system would reject products that met all specifications because the testing protocols were corrupted. Materials would be processed incorrectly because the mixing ratios were designed for different equipment. How long until we can resume full production? Throks asked his chief engineer. Unknown, war leader, the engineer replied nervously. We are attempting to reverse engineer the human modifications, but our understanding is limited. Every system we fix seems to break two others. Throks crushed a metal beam with his bare hands in frustration. His people were warriors, not technicians. They could fight and die bravely, but they could not fix machines that were too complex for them to understand. Meanwhile, the hegemony continued its advance. Without the early warning network, consortium forces could not predict where the next attacks would come. Without functional weapons and shields, they could not defend themselves effectively. Without working shipyards, they could not replace their losses. Colony after colony fell to hegemony forces. Some surrendered without a fight, when they realized no help was coming. Others fought bravely, or were overwhelmed by superior numbers and functioning equipment. The Vespian diplomatic corps tried desperately to negotiate ceasefires and peace treaties, but their elegant words carried no weight without military strength to back them up. Harmony speaker Wisptel floated through the halls of the consortium embassy, his musical voice growing more strained each day as he received reports of new defeats. Perhaps we should attempt to contact the humans, Wisptel suggested to his staff. They might be willing to provide technical assistance in exchange for appropriate compensation. The suggestion was transmitted to the consortium leadership, but the response was swift and harsh. Prime Minister Zethkal refused to consider asking humans for help. The very idea was humiliating beyond acceptance. On the independent human colony of New Terra, Governor Lisa Palmer received the first desperate communication from Administrator Veltar, the same Zenthari who had dismissed human contributions. For years was now requesting temporary technical assistance in exchange for generous compensation. Palmer read the message twice to make sure she understood it correctly. The consortium was offering to pay humans to come back and fix the mess they had created by leaving. Her response was polite but firm. The Independent Human Alliance was no longer available for consortium service. Humanity had other priorities now. Those priorities were becoming clear across human space. Free from consortium restrictions and demands, human colonies were expanding rapidly. Engineers like Jake Morrison and Pete Williams were finally able to work on projects that interested them instead of just maintaining alien equipment. 6 months after humanity's exodus, the Galactic Consortium had lost nearly 30% of its territory. The hegemony controlled vast stretches of former consortium space, and other hostile groups were moving in to claim what they could. The once proud alliance was dying, and everyone knew it. On the Zenthari homeworld, Chief Logic Coordinator Zinth Al stood before a bank of failing computers. The crystal matrices that powered Zenthari civilization were developing cascade errors that spread like a disease through their networks. Every attempt to fix the problems only made them worse. The trouble was that Zenthari minds worked in rigid patterns. They could calculate complex equations and process vast amounts of data, but they could not adapt when things went wrong in unexpected ways. Their solutions were mathematically perfect, but practically useless. Zinth Al had assigned his best technicians to reverse engineer the human modifications found in their systems. After months of work, they had produced detailed technical manuals that explained exactly how the human improvements worked. But knowing how something worked was not the same as being able to recreate it. The human modifications violate 17 established engineering principles, reported his chief engineer Vethkal. Their solutions should not function according to our calculations, yet our systems fail without them. Zinth Al's crystals flickered with frustration. And our calculations must be incomplete. Analyze the modifications again. We have analyzed them 47 times, Coordinator. The results are always the same. The humans somehow made our equipment work better than our own designs intended. The conversation was interrupted by alarms throughout the facility. Another computer core had failed, taking with it the climate control systems for 3 major cities. Emergency power kicked in, but it would not last long. Without proper cooling, the Centauri population centers would become uninhabitable within days. Similar scenes were playing out across Centauri space. Their perfect mathematical models were proving inadequate for the messy reality of keeping a civilization running. They needed human intuition and creativity, but their pride would not let them admit it. The situation was equally desperate on Maraxian worlds. War leader Throx walked through the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's most advanced shipyard. Massive construction bays sat empty, their assembly lines frozen by cascading system failures. The Maraxians were strong and brave, but their technology had become too complex for them to manage alone. Different alien systems had been integrated over centuries, creating hybrid machines that required constant adjustment. The humans had provided that adjustment, making tiny changes that kept everything working smoothly. Now those machines were breaking down faster than Maraxian engineers could repair them. Every fix seemed to create new problems. Equipment that had worked perfectly for decades was suddenly unreliable and dangerous. "War leader, we have lost another production line," reported his chief engineer. "The fabrication sequence is rejecting all input materials. Our technicians cannot determine the cause." Throx examined the failed machinery with growing anger. These were Maraxian-built machines operated by Maraxian workers, but they no longer responded to Maraxian commands. Somehow, the humans had become essential to operating Maraxian equipment, and no one had noticed until it was too late. "Shut down the entire facility," Throx ordered. "We will rebuild using purely Maraxian technology." But rebuilding would take years, and the consortium did not have years. The hegemony was advancing on multiple fronts, and other enemies were gathering. Like scavengers around a dying animal, the Vespians were suffering different, but equally serious problems. Their ancient communication networks were dissolving into chaos as relay stations failed across their territory. The graceful, floating beings had always relied on their ability to communicate instantly across vast distances. But that ability was disappearing. Harmony speaker Wisp-Tel drifted through the communication center on the Vespian homeworld, listening to static where beautiful music should have been. The relay stations were incredibly old, some dating back thousands of years. They required delicate maintenance that combined technical skill with artistic sensitivity. The humans had provided that maintenance, treating the ancient equipment with the respect and care it deserved. They had learned to listen to the subtle harmonics that indicated system health. They had developed an intuitive understanding of how the old technology worked. Now those relay stations were failing one by one, and Vespian technicians could not save them. Their artistic minds could appreciate the beauty of the ancient systems, but they lacked the practical knowledge to keep them running. "How many stations have we lost today?" Wisp-Tel asked his assistant. 17 more have gone silent," came the melodic reply. "At this rate, we will lose all long-range communication within 3 months." Without communication, the Vespian diplomatic corps could not function. They could not negotiate treaties, coordinate defenses, or even warn distant colonies of approaching danger. The Vespians were becoming isolated on their own worlds, cut off from the galaxy they had once helped to unite. Meanwhile, humanity was not just surviving their independence, they were thriving. The Independent Human Alliance had grown rapidly. As more colonies joined and new settlements were established, free from consortium restrictions, human innovation was accelerating at an incredible pace. President Claire Mitchell stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, watching construction ships assemble humanity's first major shipyard. The massive structure was a testament to human engineering and determination. It incorporated lessons learned from maintaining alien technology, but it was designed and built entirely by humans. The first ship should be ready for launch next month, reported her aide, a former consortium engineer named Bill Cooper. Captain Bennett wants to name the lead vessel New Beginning. Mitchell nodded approvingly. The name was perfect. Humanity was indeed making a new beginning, one based on cooperation and mutual respect, rather than hierarchy and subservience. The human ships, being built at the new shipyard, were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were smaller than consortium vessels, but more versatile. They could operate in any environment and interface with any technology. Most importantly, they were reliable. Dr. Helen Carter had been appointed as the Alliance's Director of Technology Development. She worked with teams of human engineers who had spent decades maintaining alien equipment. Their experience had given them unique insights into the strengths and weaknesses of different technological approaches. The key is adaptability, Helen explained to a group of new colony administrators. Consortium species each developed advanced technology, but they made it too specialized. Their systems only work under perfect conditions with constant maintenance. Jake Morrison, now chief engineer at the Armstrong shipyard, had taken a different approach. His designs were intentionally simple and robust. They might not have the raw power of consortium equipment, but they worked consistently in real-world conditions. I learned something important during my years fixing alien machines, Jake told his design team. Complexity is the enemy of reliability. The more complicated you make something, the more ways it can fail. The human approach was paying off in dramatic ways. Human colonies were expanding into regions that other species had considered too hostile or remote. Human ships were exploring star systems that had been abandoned as inaccessible. Human settlements were thriving in environments where alien technology failed. Word of human success was spreading throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans before were sending diplomatic missions to learn about these remarkable beings who could make anything work. Trade agreements were being signed with dozens of non-consortium governments. The contrast with consortium territory was becoming stark. While human space expanded and prospered, consortium worlds were losing contact with each other as communication networks failed. While human ships explored new frontiers, consortium vessels were stranded in their home systems by mechanical failures. Sam Foster, now running a major research facility on New Terra, received regular intelligence reports from contacts still in consortium space. The news was uniformly grim. Food shortages were spreading as agricultural systems broke down. Manufacturing centers were shutting down permanently. Entire star systems were becoming isolated as transportation networks collapsed. They still refused to ask for help, Sam reported during his weekly briefing with Alliance leadership. Consortium pride apparently runs deeper than common sense. That pride was becoming increasingly costly. Every day brought new failures and new losses. The hegemony continued its advance, meeting little effective resistance from consortium forces. Other hostile groups were moving in to claim territory and resources. Some individual consortium worlds had quietly sent unofficial requests for human assistance. These messages came through back channels and intermediaries, carefully worded to avoid admitting the true scope of the crisis. The Alliance leadership discussed each request carefully, but ultimately declined them all. We cannot help people who refuse to acknowledge they need help, President Mitchell explained to her cabinet. More importantly, we cannot trust people who might turn on us again once their immediate crisis passes. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal, the last functional consortium vessel limped through space toward Haven, the capital world of the independent human alliance. The cruiser Unity's End was a fitting name for the ship carrying the final delegation. From what remained of the galactic consortium, Captain Roy Bennett watched the approaching vessel from the bridge of his ship, the New Hope. He had been assigned to escort the consortium delegation to Haven. a task that felt both historic and deeply ironic. A year ago, he had evacuated human refugees from Consortium space. Now he was bringing their former masters to beg for help. The Unity's end was a shadow of what Consortium ships had once been. Its hull was scarred from battles with the hegemony. Emergency repairs were visible everywhere, crude patches that showed how desperate things had become. Most telling of all, the ship's running lights flickered constantly, a sign that even basic electrical systems were failing. "This is Captain Bennett of the New Hope," Roy transmitted. "Follow my ship to Haven Station. Do not deviate from the assigned course." The reply came from Prime Minister Zethkal himself, his voice strained and tired. "Understood, Captain Bennett. We are grateful for your escort. Grateful." Roy almost smiled at that. The same Maraxian leader who had called humans adequate servants was now expressing gratitude just for safe passage to human space. On Haven Station, President Claire Mitchell prepared for the most important meeting in human history. The delegation, arriving today, represented the last remnants of Consortium leadership. They were coming to ask for help, though none of them would admit it directly. The delegation included the highest-ranking officials from each surviving Consortium species. Prime Minister Zethkal led them, but he was no longer the proud warrior who had dismissed humanity a year ago. War leader Throx accompanied him, representing what remained of the Maraxian military. Chief Logic Coordinator Zinthael came for the Zenthari, his crystal formations dim with exhaustion. Harmony speaker Wisptel floated weakly beside them, his once beautiful voice reduced to harsh whispers. They gathered in Haven's council chamber, a simple room that reflected human values of practicality and equality. There were no grand displays of power or wealth, just comfortable seats arranged in a circle. The contrast with the Consortium's ornate assembly halls was deliberate and striking. President Mitchell entered with her advisors, including Dr. Helen, Carter, Captain Bennett, and other representatives of humanity's new leadership. These were people who had once been dismissed as servants and janitors. Now they held the fate of galactic civilization in their hands. "Welcome to Haven," President Mitchell said simply. "We understand you have a proposal to discuss." Prime Minister Zethkal struggled to find words. For months he had rehearsed this moment, but now that it was happening, his pride fought against the necessity of what he had to say. "President Mitchell," he began slowly, "the Consortium faces unprecedented challenges. We come to propose a new alliance, one based on mutual benefit and shared responsibility." The words were carefully chosen to avoid admitting the truth that everyone in the room knew. The Consortium was not facing challenges. It was dying. They were not proposing an alliance. They were begging for rescue. Chief Logic Coordinator Zinthael stepped forward, his crystals flickering with desperate hope. "Our analysis indicates that cooperation between our species would be mathematically advantageous for all parties involved." Dr. Helen Carter leaned forward slightly. "What kind of cooperation are you proposing, Coordinator?" Zinthal's crystals dimmed as he struggled with the admission. "Our technical systems require ... adjustment. Zenthari methods have proven inadequate for maintaining hybrid technologies. We request human expertise in exchange for full Consortium membership and equal representation." The request hung in the air like a physical thing. After decades of being dismissed and overlooked, humans were being asked to save the civilization that had rejected them. War leader Throx spoke next, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The Maraxian shipyards and military installations require immediate technical assistance. We offer complete access to our weapons technology and manufacturing capabilities in exchange for human engineering support." Harmony speaker Wisptel's musical voice was barely audible as he made his plea. "Our communication networks are failing. Without them, diplomacy becomes impossible. We cannot maintain peace between species if we cannot speak to each other." "President, Mitchell listened to each plea without expression. When they finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, considering her response. "You offer us full membership in the consortium," she said finally. "But the consortium no longer exists in any meaningful way. You control perhaps 20% of your original territory. Your fleets are destroyed. Your infrastructure is failing. Your member species are abandoning the alliance to save themselves." The brutal honesty of her assessment hit the delegation like physical blows. Zephkal armor seemed to dull. Zinthal's crystals flickered erratically. Wisptel sank lower in the air. "What you are really asking," Mitchell continued, "is for humanity to rebuild your civilization from scratch while you maintain the pretense of leadership." Captain Bennett spoke for the first time. "We have reports from across former consortium. Space, the hegemony controls the core worlds. The outer rim colonies have declared independence. Your homeworlds are isolated and struggling to maintain basic services. There is no consortium left to join." Prime Minister Zethkal finally broke. The proud warrior who had ruled the galaxy's greatest alliance fell to his knees before the humans. He had once dismissed. "You are correct," he admitted, his voice breaking. "The consortium is dead. Our pride killed it. Our arrogance destroyed everything we built. We come not as leaders offering partnership, but as refugees begging for mercy." The admission sent shockwaves through the alien delegation. To see their supreme leader kneel before humans was the final destruction of their old worldview. Dr. Helen Carter rose from her seat and walked to stand before Zethkal. The same woman who had been dismissed as a waste management supervisor now looked down at the most powerful being in the known galaxy. "You called us adequate servants," she said quietly. "You said we should be grateful for inclusion. Do you remember that?" Zethkal nodded without looking up. "I remember. I was wrong. We all were wrong." "Yes, you were," Helen agreed. "But the question now is whether you understand why you were wrong." She gestured to the other humans in the room. "We were never your servants. We were the foundation your civilization was built on. You could not see our value because you needed us to be inferior to feel superior yourselves." Zinthal's crystals pulsed with realization. "You were essential, and we made you invisible." "Exactly," Helen said. "And that is why the old consortium cannot be rebuilt. It was based on lies about superiority and inferiority. Any new alliance must be built on truth." President Mitchell stood and addressed the delegation directly. "The Independent Human Alliance will consider partnerships with individual species and worlds. But those partnerships must be between equals. There will be no hierarchy based on assumed superiority. No species will be overlooked or dismissed." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Some human colonies may choose to work with your people. Others may not. Each human settlement will make its own decision based on how they are treated." The terms were clear. Humanity would not rebuild the consortium as it had been. Instead, they would help create something new, something better, based on mutual respect and genuine equality. War Leader Throx looked up from where he knelt beside his leader. "What of those who demonstrate change? Those who prove they have learned from our mistakes?" "Actions speak louder than words," Captain Bennett replied. "Prove that you see us as equals, and we will treat you as partners. Continue to see us as servants, and you will get nothing." Over the following months, some former consortium species took the lesson to heart. They approached human colonies with genuine respect and offers of equal partnership. These species found humans willing to share knowledge and work together on mutually beneficial projects. Others could not overcome their ingrained prejudices. They continued to view humans as useful tools rather than equal partners. These species found themselves increasingly isolated as Their infrastructure continued to decay without human assistance. The galaxy was reshaping itself around a new reality. Humanity had become the bridge between different technologies and philosophies. Those who accepted humans as equals thrived. Those who did not slowly faded into irrelevance. A year later, Dr. Helen Carter stood in the observation lounge of the Starship Destiny, one of the first vessels built through human-alien cooperation. The ship incorporated the best technologies from multiple species, but it worked because humans had learned to make incompatible systems function together. Through the viewport, she could see New Terra growing in the distance. The planet was now home to humans, reformed Xanthari, progressive Moraxians, and several other species who had embraced the new way of thinking. It was not perfect, but it was working. Captain Roy Bennett joined her at the viewport. His ship was part of a mixed fleet, exploring regions of space that had been considered too dangerous for the old consortium. With human adaptability bridging the gaps between alien technologies,